Hello 6193, this is Desi, and today I will be presenting Theories of Falling by Sandra Beasley. I'll start by reading 3 poems. The first is from the first section, and it's called Allergy Girl, and I'm just reading the first section of the poem. Wasting. A hunger so great, I bite through a pacifier. My mother tries to fix me with more milk, more milk. Doctors run tests on my squalling body. No breast is safe. No cow, goat, soy milk. I nurse on apple juice. My parents agree on one rule: don't break the baby. They pour quarters into the arcade game of adulthood, working the mechanical claw, right, left, right, back, aiming for the stuffed bear, missing. A clutch of cheesecake, a buttermilk biscuit. Each time my lips swelling, breath skipping. They pace the ER. Did we break the baby? My mother dissects labels, casein, protein, lactolate. Easier to cook from scratch. My father perfects. Shh, it's not that bad. You can breathe. Breathe. They cradle me in Benadryl. That's the secret of marriage. Bleary silence in white rooms. Too busy not breaking me to take the wrecking ball to each other. From section 2, the title piece, Theories of Falling. After years of research, I can only guarantee that if you go over Niagara in a kayak, you will die. A ball of chicken wire and quilts, you might make it. Oak barrel, you'll walk away, though just to die in a poorhouse 10 years later. The odds drop above the 8th floor window, yet even from 30,000 feet, a canopy of trees may catch you. Luck comes to fighter pilots and check stewardesses. Rotoscope cameras have captured the cat as he swivels, first head, then spine, aligns his hind legs, arches for impact. He turns his helix over and over until the ground rises to meet him. He bounces. We do not bounce. Not that we don't have a knack for certain kinds of falling. Bringing a man home after 5 rounds of bourbon because the snow piled up and he has no coat. Leaving 3 friends to try hailing a taxi to Virginia while he burrows for warmth and says, "You're so good to me. You're so good to me." Hands diagramming every curve. A kind of sleepy, lustful mathematics. Swivel your head. Align your legs. See if you can land on your feet. Sometimes an elevator cable does snap. There is an immediate heat, the squeal of atoms torn away. As you hurtle toward bottom, you may think, if I time this right, I can be in the air when it hits. From the outside, we see this makes no difference. What matters is speed relative to the earth, not the floor of the elevator. But you are not outside. You're in the cage, bracing your knees, blood coiling in your heels. So go ahead. Jump, for God's sake. Jump like your life depends on it. And from the 3rd section, the angels. They have 2 noses, 6 eyes in the arch of each foot. They never tire of blinking down at the Americans. Our surfboards, machine guns, are dancing hamsters. The way we shower every day, then rub more oil into our skin. One notes, there is no end to the number of things they can hydrogenate. One checks the spaces in bubble wrap to see if we store useful things inside. Every April, 2 men create a thing. Then the fruit flies start dying. By each November, 1 man has a button, and 4,000 men have the job of making sure he does not push the button. One angel notes, there is no end to the number of buttons. One visits 100 random bedrooms. His 3rd ear records that "Oh God" is still popular. He notes a rise in couples sleeping side by side, holding hands tightly. He calls this the Red Rover position. 4 are assigned to the homeless and 10 to school teachers, who tend to jump from bridges more often. The one in charge of soldiers sketches the long beard of Mr. Maupin, who swore he wouldn't shave until his son came home. Mr. Maupin sleeps in a blue recliner, still in his fishing vest, one pocket stuffed with lures, the other with laminated baseball cards of his son Matt's face. The backside show an angel, all cookie-cutter wings and halo, yellow ribbons for hair, declaring not one left behind. The angel sighs and goes to sip whiskey with the angel of telemarketers. Every night, they watch lights dance across thousands of blue screens, as if, they note, constellations. Every night, they listen to the click of our million keyboards, toasting the sound American souls make as they collide. So I chose these 3 poems in particular because I really felt like they illustrate what I see to be the theme of this work. And when I talk about theme with my students, I'm always kind of pushing them to give it to me in a sentence and to really state that universal human truth that we see an author exploring. So in this case, I would say the theme is just this: human relationships will be tainted with failure. I mentioned that the work is divided into 3 sections, and similar to Kearney's work, I think that Beasley is starting with a narrow scope. So in section 1, we see the work titled The Experiment, and in this section, we see failure at the family level. The lens is zoomed in and we find unfaithful father, a mother who didn't want to have children, children fleeing the nest. And in the crown poem of this section, which lasts for about half of it, Allergy Girl, we find this theme again in lines 15 and 16. That's the secret of marriage, bleary silence in white rooms, too busy not breaking me to take the wrecking ball to each other. In section 2, Beasley sort of expands the scope as she explores this idea of falling and failure, which I sort of think to be are synonymous in this work. And now we're looking at relationships between grown-ups. Specifically, Beasley turns the lens towards exposing gaffes in sexual encounters and failings between friends. And we do see that in the piece that's the title of this section, as well as the title of the work. So in this piece, friends abandon another friend to the snow, or one friend does, so that this person can go have an erotic encounter and engage in sleepy, lustful mathematics. And of course, that attempt also seems doomed to failure. In the final section, The Silver Fish, I did not choose the title work because I really believe that the angels targeted large-scale failure across the board. So we see the author addressing political failure, specifically war, in line 9, when we have an angel say, by each November, 1 man has a button and 4,000 men have the job of making sure he does not push the button. And so just a little bit of a word to audience here. I think that basically any American would be able to suss out what that button is. Similarly, I think that the meanings of these poems are not too difficult to ascertain, although there's that level of puzzling out. It's always pleasing to puzzle, and I think it has a pretty wide appeal. After talking about war in general, Beasley zooms in line 17 through 25 to talk about Mr. Maupin, and we get this really sad picture of him in his blue recliner, waiting for his son to return, and given the nature of the book, I would say the odds of that happening are not too good. Finally, another point I want to highlight in this poem is that Beasley targets technology and how technology separates people. She almost just really takes a swipe of the absurdity of technological advances when she says, or the speaker says in line 11, there's no end to the number of buttons. So looking a little bit more deeply into craft, one of the things that really stood out to me about this work is that there's really clear rhetoric in each of the poems, and that rhetoric is really logical. So I want to unpack some of the logic that I saw in these poems. Back to Allergy Girl, Beasley is just employing clear inductive logic. So she starts with this series of events. We have these pictures of this really, really sick allergic baby. We see the characters come into play, and at the end, she uses these specific points and threads them together so that we see a broad generalization And again, that generalization is that families can use the sick children to keep a failing marriage together. I think theories of falling might have the most interesting logic, because to me, it can be read almost in the form of a research study. And what I mean by that is that there are some, formal aspects of reading a research paper that seem to be being employed, and yet it's almost genre mixed with poetic devices. So here's how I read it. In lines 1 through 12, I see a researcher sort of recapping observations about literal falling, and those culminate with the studied rotoscope observation of a falling cat. And the researcher observes that the cat bounces. But then we have this really important standalone line, which I take to be the hypothesis of the study. We do not bounce. After easing the reader from the literal to the metaphorical depictions of falling, the speaker in line 22 encourages the reader to kind of test the hypothesis by saying, align your legs. See if you can land on your feet. What's interesting is that even though the researcher seems certain of the outcome, the speaker still encourages the reader in lines 33 to 34 to jump for God's sake. Jump like your life depends on it. So I see a little bit of irony happening here. Finally, in the angels, there's also a very clear logic. And what I see happening here is sort of an observe, comment. Sometimes those comments are made in the form of dialogue, and other times they're happening in the form of things that the angels are doing. So for example, in lines 2 through 4, the angels blink down at all manner of things, surfboards, machine guns, showers, and then they comment. There is no end to the note of things they can hydrogenate. In lines 12 through 13, one angel visits two lovers in a bedroom, or potentially somebody praying. It's a great double meaning there. And records, oh, God is still popular. These observations of these oddly rendered angels, coupled with comments, really weave a skilled commentary about the ridiculousness of Americans and the relationships that we employ. I also want to tackle a little bit of diction in my remaining time, because I think that in addition to the logic, her word choices serve these pieces so well. So even though the poem is really written in the language of the everyday, it's not uncommon to find technical or really scientific jargony sounding words throughout the poems. This definitely happens in Allergy Girl. We have all the casual speak, and then we have this little list of types of proteins, casein, then protein, then lactolate. And then in Theories of Falling, we have a specialized rotoscope making an appearance. And I think that Beasley does this to sort of lend credence to the idea that there's a researcher checking out all these different relationships and theorizing throughout the book. But she never forgets that she's writing poetry. And so she knows that her subject matter, she just knows it so well that she's able to just appropriate these words and make them serve her craft. And so that's something that I really want to take away as I'm writing, because I do have some interesting technical knowledge, and I try to slip those words in, and it just doesn't quite fit. And so I'm looking at her and I'm saying, okay, she's got these sonic qualities happening for her. How can I imbue my pieces with some of this technical terminology, but not make it sound jarring? I will close by directing you to my imitation of Allergy Girl. And I did try to employ some of my specialized knowledge in my field as I imitated this poem. Please do feel free to ask me questions on the forum, because I am in love with this work and I want to talk about it more. And 15 minutes just wasn't enough time. Bye.